Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 172 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host today, Bill. My name is Bill Sutton, the Director of Modern Workspace at XenTegra. I have some other XenTegra folks on the call with us, as well as a couple of folks from Citrix. So we'll start off with Andy Whiteside from XenTegra. Andy, introduce yourself real quick.
Hey, Bill, glad to be on. Love what we do. Glad we're doing these and excited to talk about Citrix and security today, which it's always been a always been a security play for me. The idea of zero trust in my world started with Citrix.
Yes. And in that vein, we also have with us another person from XenTegra, Aaron Banner. Aaron Banner, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about your role and so forth, since this is the first time you've been on. Welcome.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Bill. Appreciate the opportunity to join you today. Yeah, I'm Aaron Banner. I run two practices with XenTegra. I run a networking practice and I run a security practice. And I think we're here today to talk a little bit about security, zero trust, app development, and some key things that comes out of this acquisition from Citrix. Thanks.
Great, Aaron. Appreciate that. All right, Todd, you want to just say hello to the folks?
Sure. Hey, it's Todd Smith from Citrix. Glad to be here again.
Yeah, of course. Glad to have you. And last but not least, Mr. Meyers, Mr. Geremy Meyers.
Bringing up the rear. My name is Geremy. It's a pleasure to see you all. And Aaron, it's a pleasure to meet you too, actually.
Yeah, same here.
Yep. So the article we're going to cover today, the blog article, is entitled Citrix Strengthens Zero Trust Security Posture with Strategic Acquisitions of Device Trust and Strong Network. It's a long title, but it's by Sridhar Mullapudi, who's the business unit manager, I believe, over Citrix. This is a new basically talking about a new acquisition Citrix made last week of two companies, Device Trust and Strong Network. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into this in terms of what these do and how they augment or benefit the Citrix ecosystem.
Hey, Bill, I told you guys coming in, I wasn't going to say much, but I already see something I got to talk about.
Please.
So what I just realized is the number one security play at XenTegra historically and still is Citrix, where people remotely access data and applications, whether they're on the network or remote. And the number one and two people that I need to work with in this space are Geremy and Todd, and my security guy just met them for the first time.
Yep.
That's the alignment around Citrix and security in our world makes complete sense.
Yeah.
But bringing us together and us going to the market together with Citrix and security, I just realized that I failed.
So, Andy, to be fair, we walked into that one a little bit, right? So I didn't tee that up whatsoever. But to be honest, I had a meeting with a CISO recently where we had to convince as an account team, we had to convince the CISO that it was worth meeting with us by socializing. There's a security aspect of what it is we do, and it was completely unknown to her. So I say all that just to say we're in a space where Citrix is almost out of the gate been a security solution,
yes,
and yet it doesn't always get viewed as one. So
IT has one job. IT has one job, and that's get people access to applications and data in a high definition user experience and securely. That's what Citrix does.
And I think Andy, one of the kind of a comment that goes along with your statement that you just made is security has always been considered as an add-on to that stack. We should really look at it as securely providing access remotely or on network to applications and data instead
with the high definition user experience.
Correct. Yeah. And it would be great if we could say all of those things are equal and parallel when we're making that statement, but we don't talk that way. We need to have things in a sequence. But I think we need to change the mindset a little bit within our customer and our partner community to better understand that we've been doing security for almost our entire time that Citrix has been a company. And we always got caught up in the one slide that said Citrix secure by design. That always led to conversations about, well, what exactly do you mean by that? This is, what we're going to talk about in this article is really expanding upon that secure by design concept and really talk about, this is something we've been doing for 30 plus years.
And I think So, I think, to be fair, as a Citrix employee, I've been here 12 years now. Yeah, we could do a better job of really sort of articulating where we fit into the security story of the customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about security, like, that's a very nebulous word, right? So most customers have a layered approach to security. Where does Citrix fit into that layered approach? And so understanding like what the solution does, honestly, understanding our customers' approach to security, and of course, kind of where we play into that, where we layer into that. I think we've got a pretty powerful story, but it can't be, Todd, to your point, we can't have the one slide that's secure by design. What does that even mean, right? So I think, what we do here with Strong Network, what we do from the Citrix solution really should be understanding, where we fit into a customer strategy. And I think that's honestly where we probably need to get better as an organization.
Well, and there's also the mindset that you can never stop innovating. You can never stop trying to become more secure, and you can look at it as just the latest acquisition from Citrix. You can look at it as maybe defense in depth or defense across a broad spectrum. But I mean, what, about a year ago, I think Citrix bought Uber Agent, a European company. Then just now, Device Trust and Strong Network. Strong Network, I believe, is a Swiss company. Device Trust, I looked up before we came here to understand a little bit more about them, but GmbH, so it tells me they're a German company. So something's happening in Europe that Citrix really likes, and they're pulling in, it looks to me like, a lot of the right capabilities from these partnerships or these acquisitions in order to really drill down on their security platform.
Aaron, what I think it is overall the world of Citrix is secure by design, secure from the beginning. And then you factor in the ecosystem like the iGels and now the Device Trusts of the world, and it only compounds the security narrative.
Right.
All good stuff. So let's talk first about Device Trust. There's some elements in this blog article that talk about the benefits of it, but why don't we talk first about what it does and what it accomplishes, at least from a technical or end user experience level. And Geremy, can you talk about it? I can talk a little bit about it, but I thought I'd start with you.
Man, so I'm still picking this apart, actually. So, the one thing that it seems to overlap with is our security app, analytics platform. And the idea behind that was to sort of have continual security posturing, right? And this is what Device Trust does really well. So the idea is, I can certainly, just from a zero trust perspective, I can certainly sort of vet you out on the way in. To be fair, we've got a solution that kind of already does that with device posturing service, right? So if you're a cloud customer and you're authenticating through the workspace, there is a front door you've got to get through in order to even get initial access. But I think the idea behind Device Trust is continual.
Yes.
Not so much authorization. Maybe it's authorization. This is where I get my security words mixed up. But listen, if I turn off a feature of my machine, like the firewall turned on, I turn it off. That's a change in my posture. I want to take immediate action. Maybe I switch networks. I'd like for my posture to change immediately. Like, I don't want to wait 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or the next time I log in for that posture check to happen. So a big piece of this is some pretty granular controls that happen in session on the fly and immediately can restrict access based on your change in posture.
Well, yeah, and if I can chime in just a little bit on what I understand now about Device Trust, we've been trying to continually answer the challenge of this remote hybrid workforce. And this is another great way to do that. So, in the identity space, if you will, you've got personal entities and non-personal entities. Device Trust really looks at those non-personal entities, looks at the systems accessing your network and granting access. And so it's not only saying that this device is able to access this network, but it's looking at all the things that are on that device. And you can tailor Device Trust to the devices, to the information you want. It's not just what it gives you, by default, but you can say, I want to know these things about these types of devices, whether that be a network device or an endpoint device, whatever that is. And so it's going to, as as it's allowing or disallowing association with the network or association or access to information, it is going to verify not only that device, but what's on that device.
Right. It can also, because I tested this out a little bit in the demo environment that Citrix has got available for us. And the interesting thing that I found about it was, to Geremy's point, of course, that you can do the device posture as you come in the front door. But once you're in the door and you're running your desktop, if you start certain applications, in the case of the demo environment, it was the snipping application, it immediately locks your session. And if you, and to Geremy's point, if you were to disable the firewall on it, it would do the same thing. So it's monitoring the environment in real time and looking for changes in behavior. If you plug in a USB stick, maybe it locks the environment, that sort of thing. You can set all kinds of granular policies to provide contextual access based on what the user is doing. So there's a lot of security benefits in that regard, but it's interesting how it works.
And it's really, to even add on to that, think about this as more and more companies are addressing bring your own device environments, or, users are starting to do things like do updates of either an application, some type of software or operating system update, or even adding a plugin into a browser can have an impact on the overall security posture of that device itself. And that's happening in the background after you've already set up your Citrix connection, right? So we need to make sure that we have something in the path of that user connecting into a virtual app or virtual desktop environment to be able to detect that there's been something that has changed and apply the appropriate policy associated with that change.
Definitely, yes. Anything else on device trust in particular, either generally or specifically about the acquisition before we move forward?
Yeah, I think this is a very important piece to include in the Citrix stack. And it's so important that we have made this a part of not only the new hybrid multi-cloud license, which most customers are migrating to. So if you're not familiar, I know we've covered this several times. It is the pretty standard license. Most customers land on this. It's a combination of cloud and on-prem licensing and several other buckets, including UberAgent, by the way. So that was recently moved into this license, but it also includes legacy DAS, legacy universal workspace service. So any cloud service that you own, you will get access to this piece. That's how important product management and the business think device trust, zero trust network access is to just the security stack. So I think that's an important point to make. And from a layered perspective, it also includes now, like I mentioned, UberAgent. So yes, I can get visibility into my environment from a infrastructure perspective. I'm looking at the VDAs, I'm looking at the Citrix components. Heck, I can even look at and monitor, components that support the Citrix components, like say your SQL database. But at the same time, there are security events that can be monitored from an UberAgent perspective as well. So again, we talked about that defense in depth, that layered approach. You can see where we're bringing this into just the standard core components of that UHMC or even DAS service license.
Well, let's talk about the business aspect of that. Like, for Citrix to continue to be relevant, it's about taking the good and great technologies they have and then stacking additional things on top of that, so that when somebody's trying to evaluate, okay, maybe I just want to move to Microsoft AVD, I want to use some minimal product to get this job done. Yes, you could do that from a decent user experience perspective, but Citrix is stacking up high definition user experience along with high definition security simultaneously to make the platform valuable to the point where there's something in that stack that the client can't live without, and they're willing to pay for the more premium product.
Yeah. And honestly, Andy, to bring it home, because you usually stop me whenever I get started down the path of the Citrix value, and you go, honestly, the number one thing historically has been what? The fact that it's multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, No, it's the fact that the protocol is that's the secret sauce right there. The HDX, the ICA piece, the user experience is thing number one. And I think what you're saying, to your point, is security is just becoming more embedded and visible into the base product.
Well, I think what I'm saying is, yeah, the protocol is still the one I want to pull out of the bag if I have to go tackle a project. but that's harder to sell people on. And then all of a sudden you point out just key components like we're talking about here.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, yeah, my security guy can't live without that. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else on the device trust piece before we move on to strong networks? All right, strong networks. I'd be honest to the listeners. This one kind of confounded me. I'm hoping that some of the guys from Citrix can really shed some light on this one. It looks like some sort of development environments that are enabled from DAS or from CVAD. Can you guys elaborate at all on this?
Yeah, I think I could take a stab at this one because it's really dealing with the DevOps, right?
Yeah.
It used to be, if you think about it, you used to have programmers and you had operations team, right? In the cloud, especially these cloud-based applications that are being constantly tweaked and updated and things like that, that line between development and operations has really kind of blurred. And you now have some organizations that are saying, you know what, our developers do have access to migrate code and to do things. With that shift, there's been a much more increased need for better security and better monitoring and restrictions on what they can do and how they do it. So strong networks really kind of helps be able to kind of bridge that gap there. Securing resources, so giving access to a developer to a secured development environment that then restricts their ability to go up and just push things directly into production without going through a couple of gates, whether that be some type of authorization or some type of data and code control or some type of kind of a automated workflow before you can actually push those things into a production environment.
Yeah, I mean, development inherently is very insecure, not secure,
Yep.
in general. And I think this is something that gets lost on a lot of the developers out there, or companies that are leading development teams. And so there's multiple ways, multiple tools out there to solve this challenge, but it's clearly a challenge that Citrix wanted to take on. And the issue I think you have, team, is that you've got someone working on a development scenario here, and with the hybrid or multi-cloud environment, you may have pieces of that, whether it be tools or data or whatever, scattered everywhere. You may be doing development here in Azure, and some other things, data or tools maybe in AWS. You may have an on-prem environment that's accessing that. So you're doing this one action in this one place, but you're reaching all over the place in order to pull all that together. And so the theory behind what's happening here is that you're securing that from the start of development all the way through to landing in a protection environment, and that's critical, and something that a lot of organizations just clearly I've seen don't understand.
Yeah.
So
and part of it is, the historical, the historical waterfall development practices that were out there, where you'd have, before you could move on to the next level or the next step, you had to go through a series of gates, or you had to go over you have to get to the next level of that waterfall. There was always things like software quality assurance, software quality control, and you would have a configuration management team that would manage that process of taking it from your QA and test environment and moving that into a production environment. And they were the ones responsible for making sure that there were things like testing validation, making sure the libraries all match up, making sure all of those, they would literally go through a checklist before they would allow that piece of code to actually be migrated into the production libraries. And a lot of that has changed with, the agile development framework, a lot of organizations kind of merging the developer and operations teams together. A lot of the third-party software as a service and web-based apps, there's some of those things are no longer in the customer's control. And And strong network is a yet another tool that can be brought into play to help manage that environment.
So one of the things we do, Bill, is ATSs is, with
Right.
our accounts is we're really trying to understand the use cases within the customer's environment. And without a doubt, 99% of the time, each of our customers has a dev use case, a developer use case. Either these are internal employees, or actually what's happening more often than not, it's an external contractor.
Yeah.
And
overseas,
so,
like,
especially for an external contractor, listen, most organizations don't want to go ship a laptop. So what do? They spin up a VDI desktop, right? So they'll give
Right.
someone a Windows desktop into some kind of environment that they've got to patch and maintain. And by the way, is more expensive than maybe some alternatives. But that's just kind of how it works today, right? It's easy. It's very containerized. It honestly presents some problems because a lot of the developers like their own tools and they're kind of stuck with whatever is included inside the desktop, or I'm going to create a dedicated desktop and let a developer just kind of go nuts with whatever they need, right? So, I think one of the pieces to this is, can we help save costs by maybe providing a different modality to doing this? So, with Strong Network, they are honestly customized for dev use cases, right? So typically it's either maybe a Linux virtual machine that's typically less expensive and it's the platform most developers use, or B, it's a container of some kind, right? And so, providing the developers the platform they tend to use with the tools they tend to use and securing it. And I'm still working on some of the details just for myself and what this architecture looks like, but that's kind of what we're going here. Can we help you reduce costs and spend for this use case that is very common in most enterprise organizations, while at the same time making it secure and sort of tailored to this user population? So if I could sum that up, that's probably how you can pigeonhole this. Now, because it is sort of a different piece here, it is only included in the Citrix platform license today. So for organizations that are typically very large, and this maybe makes sense, right? So for larger organizations that have dedicated teams that are very distributed, lots of folks, this is probably where it makes the most sense, but that's maybe the best way to pigeonhole it today.
Well, I appreciate that. That helps me understand it a lot better. Frankly, I think the goal of all of this is to improve the management of security around zero trust, the zero trust type concept, right? That's really what Citrix is trying to accomplish based on what the article says itself. Any comments about this last section, simplifying zero trust with these tools?
I think Geremy kind of touched on this a little bit with the especially the strong networks piece that included in the platform licensing. That's part of it, right? It's the bigger overall approach towards this hybrid zero trust approach that we're adopting and we're embracing and continuing to nurture. Like we've had zero trust before zero trust was zero trust, right? And we've made some additional improvements around our security capabilities, right? We talked about device trust, we talked about strong networks, we've talked about our overall how those two fit together. But as we segue into the next segment or the next section, we've got to talk about how we're improving security around things like secure private access.
Yeah, and remember, zero trust is a framework. It's not a tool. It's not a thing.
Right.
It's a framework. And there's I think a lot of the tools that may be brought in are really to enable policy. So let's say you have a policy of, in this case with the device trust, right? You want a policy about how what you allow on endpoints, particularly those non-managed endpoints. So talk a lot about managed endpoints, but in this hybrid environment, I think someone talked earlier about BYOD. It's so now you're bringing in these unmanaged devices into your network, and you want to do that, you want to allow that, but how do you develop policies around that? And so if your policy says, I don't know, these things cannot be allowed on the network, even though this device can be allowed on the network. Well, now this is a tool that helps you to enforce that policy. And so just always remember, like zero trust is it's nothing but a framework. And so, and largely, a lot of the technologies aren't required for zero trust, but a lot of the technologies are required in order to implement the policies that you want to define in your zero trust environment.
Thanks, Aaron. Definitely good information. So I want to double down on the next section, which is Citrix enhances hybrid work with expanded secure private access. Obviously, what they're talking about here to some degree, correct, is the things we just talked about, which is device trust and strong networks. But I think beyond that, there's some changes to SPA. Geremy and Todd, keep me honest, around on-premises data plane. Is that some of what's being covered here?
I think it's alluding to it, Bill.
Yeah.
So, traditionally, secure private access has been a solution that has been entirely cloud-based. And, believe it or not, so we've got a fully on-prem version of this as well. In fact, it's baked into the product. You go turn it on. And more recently, we have customers who like the administration of the cloud, but would prefer sort of a data flow on-prem. So true hybrid. So we've also got hybrid SPA that, Todd, is it tech preview or has it been released yet? I forget where this stands.
I believe it's still a tech preview.
Still tech preview, yeah. So this is coming again. It's sort of an evolution of this secure private access. And ultimately, to take a step back, historically, when Andy and I got started 11 billion years ago, this was entirely virtual, Windows applications, and that's it. Of course, we've evolved to include Linux applications, but a big part of the story now is how do you deliver web and SaaS-based applications, right? So something that typically required a web browser. And the SPA solution is actually inclusive of two different things. One is sort of a VPN, virtual private access, SPA access. Think of it as more of a more modern, smarter VPN, if you will, but also an enterprise browser as well, a containerized enterprise browser that you can apply policies to. So, those two pieces, again, two pieces of the layers here, right? Can you do SPA without the enterprise browser? Sure. There is a legacy VPN piece to that, but you can also pair the enterprise browser with SPA to provide, things like internal access to websites without the full-on VPN. What's interesting is this is the model that Citrix has gone to as employees. So, I don't have a virtual desktop anymore, Bill. I have a handful of virtual applications simply because there's some requirements from a browser perspective to support that. But 95% of what I do is all from an enterprise browser that runs locally and is rendered locally.
And Geremy, the internal cost savings on that compute workload is probably off the charts.
It is unbelievable. Yeah. So when we went through this transformation, believe it or not, initially the idea was to do managed devices to everyone at Citrix. And at some point we did the math and 180'd that, right? And the big driver behind that was cost. And so, a lot of it starts with the personas. I mean, you need to understand who your users are and what they need access to.
Did you say you went from planning unmanaged or managed devices?
Managed. We were going to be 100% managed devices across the board.
And that would be managed devices accessing a secure portal would be the check on the security plan.
Right.
But then you factored in user experience, but also the third thing, which we haven't really talked about a whole lot, and that is overall cost. And
Right.
that's when the shit gets real.
That's when it gets real.
Coming from a guy with 3 laptops on his desk.
Well, I might be right there with you too. But
in my world, I got three company-owned laptops on my desk.
But to be fair, these are 3 different personal devices that all access resources. And I'm not doing it with a VPN. I'm doing it with a containerized browser. And that is 90% of my workflow.
Wow.
The security enhancements, the browser aspect of it, where all you got to do is get a browser sandbox on there, that has probably opened the door to, I don't want to call it BYOD, but I want to call it not managed devices. So you can interpret that however you want. But that has new life again, I think.
Yep, certainly sounds like it. For sure. All right, we're at the bottom of the blog article. Any other final thoughts, comments about these 2 technologies and this article generally?
So, Geremy, you mentioned a while ago, you guys had to convince a CIO to talk to you guys about security.
Correct.
That's got to be a common thing in your world where if the world saw it the way I see it, CIOs would be coming to Citrix asking for the technology that's been around for a long time, plus the new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not reality, right? We're usually talking to the application and desktop team trying to get to the CISO. It really should be the CISO coming to us for this conversation. So I want you to answer that, and then I want Aaron to throw in his 2 cents.
All right, what was the question one more time?
Well, the question for you and Todd is how often are you getting CISOs coming to you guys, or the opposite effect of that, you're having to go to CISOs and convince them even to talk to Citrix? And then I want Aaron to chime in on how he sees those things coming together.
So it's common, but I think it largely depends on what our relationships are, where they are within the organization, right? So if we are, like you pointed out, kind of primarily in the EUC, application management, desktop management, that world, then yes, we're making the case to go see the CISO. But when we have the relationships with the right level, it's a lot easier for sure. So when we're with a VP of infrastructure, when we're with the CIO, I mean, it's a no-brainer. But listen, if it's with the EUC team, it's looked at as a end user productivity tool, not necessarily a security solution.
And is that a problem with Citrix product set, or is that a problem with the way IT departments are laid out?
Probably the latter. It's probably more with how they're laid out. I don't necessarily think it's a product issue, unless Todd clearly has an opposing view here.
Well, I do say it's both for a couple of reasons. Number one is historically, we've always been a remote access to applications and virtual desktops solution, which basically pigeonholed us into a very specific part of the organization that dealt with our products. Historically, we didn't build in a lot of security, the bells and whistles that would identify us as a security company. Yes, we have some great security tools. Not a lot of people on the EUC market understood what those security tools were. We integrated with authentication tools. We integrated with, some of the firewalls that were out there. We weren't at the network engineering level within a lot of customers. So that was one thing. The second piece of it is, it depends on where the CISO sits within the organization in relation to the EUC team or the application and desktop virtualization team or whoever's responsible for the Citrix environment. If they have a direct line of sight with the CISO, they probably have heard about Citrix. They may know a little bit about what we can do. One of our biggest challenges is getting those CISOs to understand that we can help reduce their threat risks. And oftentimes when a CISO does reach out to us, it's after they've gone through some type of threat assessment and said, hey, you have a potential problem here. You need to go talk to Citrix. And that's being done by a couple of the vendors that are out there, especially the security consulting organizations that are out there doing these threat assessments. That are kind of pushing their customers, our customers, to have a deeper conversation with us.
So, Andy, I think, listen, what were we originally trying to solve for in a lot of cases? It was the fact that client server applications just don't run well when you leave the office, right? Like trying to do that across the VPN didn't make sense. So this is how we did it. And so that was the primary reason, is to make this application work well. The passive feature to that was, oh, by the way, it's more secure at the same time. But we were trying to solve this client server piece. I mean, I still go to customers these days where, listen, they'll open up a VPN to do a Citrix session, right? Or they forget the fact this NetScaler sits at the edge and can completely air gap, the access, but we'll still do the VPN on an unmanaged device and just open up access just to do a Citrix session, which blows my mind. But it just shows me that's where, Todd, this is where I go, all right, this sits in a different spot within the organization, right? Because someone's missing that piece of the architecture.
Yeah, I want to chime in on one more thing, and I do want Aaron's feedback on this. So you're talking about the organization, structure, alignment. I'm also going to add one other thing. Like Citrix has always been, do we tell people we're a security company? Do we not? And historically, it's been because, in my opinion, that Citrix didn't want to step on the toes of the natural security vendors because they wanted to work with them, just kind of like what you were just saying a minute ago. I think we're in an era now where we just got to flat out tell people, hey, you don't need that VPN anymore. We do partner with them, but you don't need them anymore. And that's, I think, where Citrix in this version of the company is probably at or getting to be.
Well, I think just before Aaron, before you speak, I think one of the things we really try to go for to that point now is we try to be pretty, like we try to integrate with most aspects or a lot of aspects of a customer security solution. So for instance, you're probably not using Citrix for identity, right? You're probably using Okta or using Intra ID or using something else. Let's integrate with that. Or, listen, you need to build an environment that's air gapped in 2 or 3 different ways. We sort of support that from where you place your resources. Like I think from an observability perspective, we have our own solution, but customers are looking for something very specific. How can we integrate those things together? I think that's the real value is we're trying not to be the quote unquote security solution, but just, I'll come back to where I started is where do we layer into what you're doing today? I think we try really hard to have those hooks, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, Aaron, explain it all to us. What's the answer?
That's a lot to unpack.
42. The answer is 42.
So let me see if I can go back to the question you asked, and I think some of that revolves around maybe the relationship between the CISO and the CIO, because I think your question was, hey, CISOs, or your point was CISOs should be coming to Citrix, not the other way around. And I think part of that problem is that IT or network access may have been kind of, okay, that's the CIO's thing. That's not my thing. And that's bad business, if you ask me. Because at a minimum, the CISO should be interested in what is my organization doing in the Citrix environment? And if they are interested in that, which they should, then it's what is happening in the Citrix environment. And so I would say, based on these acquisitions, now I'm very familiar with the Citrix platform, but I'm not familiar with every single security aspect of the Citrix platform. So by nature of this acquisition, I would say that app dev wasn't really secured in this way previously by Citrix, right? And so they were, organizations were probably doing that outside of the Citrix platform. If a smart security person was involved and said, you can't do this in this platform right now because we need you to do it over here because of these reasons, right? Now you can bring that workload into the Citrix environment. But if it was that way before, that's definitely something the CISO should have known. So from a security aspect, the folks involved in security in any organization should have an understanding of what the security platform looks like or the security posture looks like in any environment that they're managing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, in this case, Andy, I mean, I'm sure anybody who has Citrix, it's got to be a major part of what they do on a daily basis and how their workforce does their job. And so from that aspect, there's no way that and I've been in a CISO role about 3 times, there's no way that I wouldn't want to have a very deep understanding of what that environment looks like.
But Aaron, I would say you're a unicorn. Most security guys think about, moats and intrusion. They think about some of the legacy stuff too, but they don't necessarily think about application delivery in a systematic, secured, simplified method as being the number one approach to a security. They don't think like application delivery and how you do application delivery. They think about the layers of the network and the traditional security plays. That's my take. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I mean, you may be right. My background, I don't think I've mentioned it here today. My background is 31 years in the United States Army. And I started my career as a network guy. I was an IT guy. Over my career, I've been both a CISO and a CIO. I've held both roles. And often I held both roles simultaneously. So I was both at the same time. And to me, that's where I would want to be. And then I have some security guys that kind of manage security for me and report to me on that. But I own both roles. I love that. I love that posture. So yeah, I mean, maybe folks are different, but Andy, I'll tell you, I think the last figure I saw was there's going to be 750 million applications developed by 2026.
Yeah.
Between now and 2026, 750 million different applications. So if you're a security person and that doesn't concern you, you need to figure it out.
Yeah. And guys, where this all worked out for me when we were talking to Aaron about joining us long term, we started talking about some of his examples and remotely presenting or even doing like secure browser service type of technology, whether it was specifically that or not, in like combat zones was stuff he was telling me about. I said, yeah, that's exactly right. We deliver the application smarter, but efficient and high definition. And, we mitigate most of the security risk right then and there.
Exactly.
Well,
And
listen,
I
he did say something that does resonate with me. It's the fact that, listen, if you think about the product stack, the solution stack that most organizations have, listen, you only have the bandwidth to understand what's a part of all those solutions. So it's really important for us as, first of all, as ATSs, Todd and myself, to make sure customers understand what they have, getting the right team. And to be fair, it was probably a fair question from the CISO to really understand, listen, what does your product do? Because I'm trying to understand where this fits into my strategy. So that's a fair question. But I think it's also to pull this thing home is why we need to educate XenTegra, our partners. They know the product inside and out. This is why we're doing this podcast, so you guys understand what device trust is, strong network. So again, you can take that to your customers as well. We can do a better job as an organization of socializing those pieces, right? So I think that's what we're trying to get to. And we'll keep evolving, and hopefully acquisitions like this, kind of throw it on the radar of the industry too.
Yeah, and I suspect there'll be a lot more blog type articles, Jeremy, around these topics, and we'll dive deeper as they come out, of course.
So there's a shameless plug, Bill. I'll make a shameless plug for the for Tech Zone. So if you are a Citrix customer and you have not been to Tech Zone recently, it is amazing. So there's everything from tech briefs. So for instance, if you just want to know what the heck an Uber agent is, and you don't want to go through the documentation, which reads like stereo instructions sometimes, Tech Zone's really good. It'll give you a brief overview. I use this a lot. There's even a guide on how to do a POC for like an Uber agent. I'm sure we'll see things like device trust briefs, strong network briefs, things like that. But there are articles being written by our product specialists all the time. Takes me back to the day when we used to do a lot of this. So I would highly recommend you invest some time.
Yeah.
Just checking out Tech Zone. Check out the community. It's
I'm not
different.
sure what a stereo is, but nevertheless, I got the rest of what you said. So
there you go.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, if I can just throw in one more thing from my perspective of how I approach what we do at XenTegra, is finding ways to add value to clients. And so, I just made a note to someone today about, somebody upgraded their Microsoft licensing. And so I was able to find some value in that, where they were able to trade off, something they were doing in a separate instance for that now. And so it's going to save them money over the long term. And I think you might be able to find that here too, depending on what an organization is doing. So, Citrix is yes, it's becoming more secure, but it's also becoming a platform that you're going to be able to add more workloads into because of the addition of things like strong network and device trust. So there's more things that Citrix is saying, now you can do this securely in our environment. You don't need to go outside of our environment like secure app dev, right? And so what we need, XenTegra and Citrix, what we need to be focused on is looking at our client base and saying, okay, how are you postured now? What do you have right now? What tools do you have that's doing this today that we can now maybe offset and pull that into the Citrix environment, so you don't have to have that additional time, effort, and money going into to paying or running that application any longer.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Aaron. And I think that the whole concept of the packaging changes around universal hybrid multi-cloud in Citrix and the platform license it's as much, if not more, about driving adoption of new features within the solution set. And many of those features can replace or augment other products that the customers might be using and result in cost savings, as well as a simplified structure versus a bunch of point products. So that's certainly one of the goals, and I think that Citrix has demonstrated that by these acquisitions, is the ability to grow the use cases and the security. The use case around strong networks, and of course the security capabilities around device trust is going a long way towards accomplishing that goal. All right. Any other thoughts on this topic today, folks, before we adjourn?
Bill, we always do this when we say, "Hey, well, this is a short blog post," and yet we
Yeah, I know.
we go, just where we
talk for 51 minutes, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Hey, listen, security is a good jumping off point to a lot of topics. So
It is. Yeah, for sure. So, All right. Well, thank you all very much again, as usual. Thanks, Aaron, for joining us today. It was great having you and great input. And we'll do it again next time. Happy holidays to all our listeners. And thanks a lot.
Excellent. All right, guys.
Have
Thank
me.
you, guys.
Talk to you later.